Let's do this. Let's go to here, WhatsApp. Let's go to press switch. Let's do this. Copy. Just behind a little bit. We're still on record, it's okay. Let's put it in here. Mista everywhere. Forward message. Yeah. Share. Business. Zoom in. Less than 10 minutes now. Starting in 10 minutes. Okay. Oops. We're live in YouTube. Okay, they're ready. Change it to 5 minutes. Boom, it's gone. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's get ready. Let's make it happen. The earphones helps. We're live. Yep, set the screen the right way. It also helps. PowerPoint also helps. It means that people can see what's going on. They can follow along. What have we here? What have we here? High five. No, grab yourself a place. Front seat rows. What do you got front row seats? Weißt du was, kannst du dann noch anfüllen mit Glas mit Wasser, heißem Wasser from the China? Oh, man, if I put my earphones in, you won't be able to hear. Can you able to hear me? Yes, welche Sachen? Mist? Yeah, that's the point. It's schon gekocht. You're able to hear me without it, yeah? I need them to, if I shake, if I move backwards and forwards, it will forward and closer to the speaker and they shouldn't get distortions. Okay. Should we see if we can create a poll?
What's that?
Add a question. See what it looks like. Brachas. Single choice, multiple choice. Adama. Hamotzi. And Yazona. Save. Let's see what happens now. I wonder what it looks like. No cleaning. Let's try it. No. Let's go to share. Skip that. I'll have to do that at a different time. And look, can you see if there's any papers came out in the printer? Could be there's no printer, no paper left in the drawer. Oh, no paper. Can you check if there's paper in the drawer? No, Emmanuel's fine. I'm going to send it again. If it doesn't come through. Did it come? No, Irina, yeah. Yeah, please. Muchas gracias. Oh, looking good. I'm looking the part tonight. I'm closing that door, please. And then I'm going to ask you to bring me one pencil crayon, please. Oh, I'm so happy you're here. You know my jobs for me. Thank you very much. We in the right one? Meeting info. Let's go to the okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Good evening. Welcome aboard.
Hello.
Evening.
Hi.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Great.
It's our lucky day. How's that a good day today? I bumped into a lovely gentleman this afternoon. Working hard.
Really?
Oh, yes. And not only that, he's driving so safely. I was impressed.
Really? Yeah. Round Broughton Park, you have to. Singleton Road. There's some funny drivers on Singleton Road.
They're just doing Purim tricks once in a while, don't they?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's true.
He's wearing a high vis. I'm impressed getting in and out the car. It's quite a good idea on those roads.
You stop him and buy one.
Do they sell it in the pharmacy?
Yeah.
High vis jackets.
See? Where do you work?
At Newbury Place Pharmacy.
Do they sell them there?
What?
The jackets, the high vis. High vis jacket.
Yeah. Where do you get your jacket from? Yeah.
A high vis.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Get them anyway, get them on Amazon. I've got a spare one, but it's got no replaced pharmacy on the back.
You can have it.
You can have that if you want.
Mine say Hanukkah car menorah parades on them. Do you want one of those?
That's quite funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
You need
No,
one.
just-
I'll make you a drink. You sit here. No, sit here. I'll make one.
Is Sylvia on the call?
I want one.
Hello, I am here.
Welcome aboard. Welcome on. I got an envelope from you. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
How's everyone out there? We had a taste of your thunder and lightning last night. And someone here
Yes.
mentioned that they got their electricity knocked out and they were trying to sort it 12 hours later. They're still waiting for an engineer to come round.
Oh, wow.
Well, we've got really heavy rain, and if it's, I didn't realise you're not supposed to be on the phone when it's thundering and lightning.
Oh, really?
Well, somebody told me today they got struck by lightning while on the phone.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
gosh.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And last night I was on the phone with somebody while it was thundering and lightning, and because the thunder was so loud, they could hear the thunder on the phone.
Wow.
And we've got really heavy rain now, so the plants are loving it, and the birds.
Yeah.
Well, the birds have gone to bed now, haven't they?
Where
Wow.
about are you?
Pardon?
North
Where's
Wales.
you? Oh, in Sale. Oh, right.
North Wales.
Oh, North Wales. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But you've had thunder and lightning, haven't you?
Yeah, last night. Horrible. Really
Yeah.
bad. I
It's
don't
with us for a
like,
couple of days, you know.
it's what?
I don't mind it being of an evening.
No, that's true. But I still don't like, I don't like the lightning. Don't like that at all.
It's very, very active last night. Wow,
It
some
was,
very big
it
last night.
was. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Got the kids up, they were entertained.
Yeah,
Middle
the
of
kids
night.
love it, don't they? Kids love it. Oh,
Absolutely.
God. We
I'll
get
tell you what-
older.
Yeah, we've calmed down, I guess. We slowed down. But
Yeah.
what we're going to do is we're going to get started just because last week I was planning on doing an hour and we ended up going the full hour and a half. There's that much content.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm planning on doing 90 minutes again, but if I feel it's getting too boring for anybody, we're just going to pull the plug. No, but it is really interesting stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Or send me a private chat. Send me a private chat anytime, or just log off and I'll get the message. I'm joking. There is actually some fantastic information. There was great stuff last week, and we are going to be exploring some more fantastic stuff. Last week, as a summary, we put it on the email, but I think we covered the full morning and the part of the morning where I don't know if I'm awake or asleep. Because at a certain point, you've got to tell myself, that's it, I've got to be awake now. And that's the part where you start davening because you realize what's coming up that day. I'm joking, you daven because we daven. But the reason last week, in the summary, we spoke about, first thing I do, open up my eyes, Moida Ani. Thank you, Hashem, for waking me up today. And we spoke about why that's important. We then spoke about washing our hands, the ritual way. So it's not just where we clean our hands with soap. We also use a washing cup, wrist to fingertips, how we dry our hands, and then we started exploring the particular brachas, the 14 special thank you brachas that we say in the morning. We did the basic understanding and the deep explanation of each one. While we were talking, we spoke about choice of language when it comes to davening. So should we ideally be saying it in Hebrew, but short of that, we could do it in English until we train up. Or even if we're not ready to train up with a translation, we could still get involved with the language as in having a general intention in mind. And then even if we don't know exact translation, it's also very good. So that was one point we made. And the other point we made was also about getting dressed. That even though dressing is only one of the brachas, Malbish Arumim, thank you Hashem for giving us clothing to get dressed in. But we also recognize that as we get dressed, we're always in the company of Hashem, and therefore it's always ideal to be somewhat appropriately dressed. The minhag Chabad is the minhag that we're following here. So some of the things that we're going to mention might differ from custom to custom, and that's just fine. If we know we have a different custom, the suggestion is not to change your custom, but just understand if it is different than you've learned, it's possibly because you're following a different line of customs, and the idea of having different customs for different people dates back to the time when the Jewish people were founded. So the beginning of Jewish people have always had different custom, which is an interesting idea. It made tremendous insight. But we're going to be learning along the Minhag Chabad. And if you have to choose between one and the other, follow what you're used to. Or if you don't have anything to choose from, then no problem, join in. So most of the things are the same, like we learned a lot last week. And one of the other things that are very much the same is that we all have the minhag, we all have the custom to eat food every day. Every day we eat. That's our minhag. That's how we behave. That's how we conduct ourselves, by choice, by rote, with intent, without intent. We tend to eat. The jokes that have been going around on social media have been relentless on the jokes about the person who got suntan from the light in the fridge. We kept opening the door, and all the other types of fantastic, important jokes that are going on. The exercises, someone sent me a video where the guy was doing an exercise where he was turning his hand so that the cup of wine should be properly swirled, and then his throat exercise as he swallows, the different important exercises that have to do with food. It's very much part of our tradition. Almost every Yom Tov, every festival has its particular type of foods, and not all of them are necessarily the food of health choice. The example might be a good cholent on a Shabbos afternoon isn't always the lowest on calories. And there are a number of other examples that we can have that maybe we wouldn't choose for our health diets, but they are certainly part of the Jewish diet, and that makes them Jewish. The famous Jewish idea where the Yiddish mama, the Jewish mother, is always feeding the children and the family, and the in-laws come for an afternoon before they know have this dish and that dish and more food and more food. I remember hearing a story, obviously it wasn't true, but there was a story about the guy who was in the Jewish mafia in New York, downtown Manhattan. And unfortunately for him, one day there was a tremendous shootout with the police. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, he comes barging to his mother's house and he's bleeding away. He'd managed to escape the scene. He's like, Mom, I'm bleeding. I've got shot. She says to him, son, come, have something to eat. Let's talk soon. That's the Yiddish approach, where food is very much front and center when it comes to Yiddishkeit. And that's perhaps why we're going to talk about food today. And we'll talk about davening in the next lesson. Davening will be in the next lesson, and food is going to be before. But before we go down that route, let's just say that Judaism provides a framework, as we mentioned last week, not just for davening, not just for mitzvah, as in the commandments that we have, but even on the personal stuff that we have, there is a framework in which we can thrive, and there's a framework in which we can connect to Hashem in each one. I'm going to put on the board 3 reasons why having rules and framework for just plain eating is so productive and so important to Yiddishkeit. Number 1, there's the famous marshmallow test. The marshmallow test is that they had is a brilliant study where they wanted to see self-discipline. Does it or does it not help people become successful? However you're going to define success, whatever you're looking for in life, self-discipline proved itself as a number 1 fundamental value that we need to live by. They literally took children and they put on the plate 1 marshmallow that the kid likes. Said to him, if you eat it now, you can have it and no one's going to say a word. It's yours, no problem. But if you manage to wait 15 minutes and don't eat it, I will come in and put down a second one and you will have 2. But you've got to wait 15 minutes. And then they walk out the door and they close the door and there's only the kid on their own. And the kid has to decide to wait. Self-discipline. And of course, there's cameras in the room and they're keeping an eye. And you see the kid like your hands going and they're back and this. And most kids can't hack 15 minutes on the clock and wait. Some kids did. And they marked down which kids did have the self-discipline and which didn't. And then 5 years later, the study came back and checked those kids, how they were doing in their grades, how they were doing in their health, body mass, whether they were putting on extra weight and stuff like that, how they carried themselves, social life, and tremendously, it fell in line that people who had self-discipline were doing much better in life. So although self-discipline often is a natural trait, but it's certainly something we can train up with, something we can get better at. And self-discipline at mealtime, as we know, is a challenge, but it's well worth the investment. So that's 1. Number 2, our relationship with our food. I remember hearing from somebody who's actually a very successful business person. And he said to me, I take my food very seriously. I remember I was in yeshiva in those days, and it took me time to realize that the guy wasn't making a joke. It's normal, I guess, for people to take their food seriously. And today I realized that I do that myself. I also take my food seriously. But then I was just thinking to myself, how could you take your food so seriously? Come on, it's just food. You got to eat in order to live. Well, you're going to get carried away with it. Tastes like this and tastes like that. But unfortunately, we do. And it does make a big difference to us. That relationship shouldn't end there. The relationship between me and my food should become a way to relate to the higher me, what I'm here for. In order to make food not just to be self-indulgence, but a relationship between myself and my creator, I need to be able to have rules and a framework in which I can eat so that it remains an active working relationship and the food doesn't become an obstacle, instead it becomes a path. And then last but not least, the divine plan. There's a reason why I was born. And that is because there's a world view, a world vision that the Almighty Creator had when He created. And by eating according to that plan, my food is part of the plan. And if I don't work with a plan, then my food goes against the purpose of creation. And that's why making sure I'm sticking to the rules is going to be very important. 3 great reasons to want to try and explore eating properly. And when they're saying eating properly, it doesn't just tell us about what we should eat, which we're going to discuss briefly. Mainly it's going to be how we should eat. Because what we should eat, we'll talk later. Let's talk for a second when we should eat. No, when should we eat? You know the famous story, the mother asks the child, when would you like to eat? Would you like to eat now or later? And the child says, now and later. When should we eat? We should eat all the time. No, when should we eat? So we're starting off at the beginning of the day, and we're going to say that actually the first thing we do in the morning should not be eating. The first thing we do in the morning should be davening. One should pray. One should direct my day by starting off on the right foot. I've got question chats. Does that mean that we're not hearing through? We should eat when we are hungry. I love that. Great point. Yes, we should eat when we're hungry. How often are we hungry is a different conversation. But yes, when we should only eat when we're hungry. If we're not hungry, it's not a reason to eat. Talking about social media memes, someone sent round, the fridge opens up and inside there's a door, a sign, you are not hungry, you are just bored. Go do something else. And that's the sign inside the fridge. But yeah, it's true when we are bored and we're eating just to pass time. So then that's not a good way to eat. But first thing in the morning, we should be davening. And only after that, once we're finished davening, can we go and eat. However, the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, tells us that there's a time to eat before davening. When is that? If I need strength, I'm feeling weak, I don't feel like I have the energy to get through a whole davening without rushing it, says the Shulchan Aruch, better eat first and then daven. Beautiful story. In 1851, young Rivka, who was the daughter-in-law of the then Tzemach Tzedek Rebbe of Lubavitch, and she had a health issue, went to the doctor, and the doctor instructed her that she has to eat. She must eat first thing in the morning. Her body needs it, and it's dangerous. She could contract whatever sort of illness were going around then. She needs to look after her health, and she has to eat first thing in the morning. So she figured, look, the doctor needs me to eat first in the morning. That's usually 7 o'clock. I'm going to wake up at 6, an hour earlier, daven, and by the time it comes to first thing in the morning in the doctor's mind, I'll be eating. So that way I'll still be able to daven first and then eat. When her father-in-law found out, he told her this famous line, it's better to eat in order to pray in order to eat. What a brilliant line. It's better to eat in order to pray so that I'll get the food out of the way, because what I really want to be doing is concentrating on my davening and then being starving hungry and my stomach's rumbling, but I need to daven first, I need to pray, so therefore I rush through the words of prayer in order to eat. Sorry?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, I'm going to take that as it's making sense, and we're going to go on to another interesting rule about eating times there's another thing that we have to do before we eat. So we said, number one, we should really be praying. And unless it's the food that's giving us the courage, the energy to pray, then that should be the first thing. And there's another thing that we should really do before eating, and that is feed our animals first. It's a beautiful halacha. It's the law, Jewish law that is, that before I feed myself, if I have any pets that rely on me for their nourishment, for their food. So I'm not talking about a stray cat that comes. That's nice. But if I own a cat, or if I have a goldfish, or if I have a pet canary, so there's an animal, a bird, or a fish that relies on me for their food. Certainly in farming days, this was far more common. You might have had a couple of horses in your barn, maybe some cows and sheep. If you're a farmer or something like that, you have. So if they rely on me, in other words, they're not openly grazing, but they're waiting for me to bring them food, I have to make sure that they have what they need first and only afterwards feed myself. Amazing idea. Number one, it teaches us compassion. We have to remember that we certainly can't hurt an animal, but more importantly, we should be compassionate to the animal. And equally also, it tells us that there's a chain order of how things should work. Feeding, eating is a bottom-up operation. When we pray, we're drawing down holiness from up on high, and we're bringing it down to us. When I'm eating, we're working from the human side of me and trying to become a better person. That's why we're eating. We believe that with the energy, we will do more things, and that should be done properly. That is, those who are less capable than myself should be given first, and then work our way up. And that's true of our neshamas, our souls as well. Interestingly, if a person wants to have a quick snack or at least a coffee before I go out and feed the pets, that is allowed, according to most opinions, because it's not a proper sit-down meal. Just like we can eat before davening. If we need to have just a bit of energy to get through the first few minutes of the day, that's allowed. And the example used to prove this point is the beautiful story of the first matchmaker. First matchmaker in history, at least in recorded history, is the servant of Abraham Avinu. Abraham has a special son called Yitzchak, and he sends his right-hand man, Eliezer, to go and find a wife. He goes to the well, and he's there traveling with 10 camels, or more camels, loads of camels, and he's got everything he wants with him, but he's thirsty. And he says, Hashem, whoever offers me a drink, she's showing signs of compassion, is the ideal wife for Yitzchak, who I'm looking for. Sure enough, there comes Rivka, and she brings water. She's getting water, and Eliezer says, could you get me a drink? And she gives him a drink, and she then goes and feeds all the camels. Who got the drink first? Who got the drink first? Eliezer.
Camels.
No, you would have thought so, but that's not what it says. She gave him a bit of drink, and then she watered all the camels. And that itself teaches us that although generally we feed the animals, but if it's just a snack or a refresher, that's okay, and it's not included in the rules. So that's a little bit about when we should eat. Now, before we get to actually eating, we're going to talk about sitting down for a meal. Now, I'm not sure which diet you do or don't approve of, but the Torah diet doesn't have enormous amount of snack time. There are rules for snack time, but generally the assumption is that people are eating proper meals. Proper meals is that we sit down and we eat a full-on meal. Last week we spoke about the importance of having a dining table in a home, because that's where we sit around and we eat together, not in passing. We happen to be sat on the couch watching something and we're snacking and we're eating, and then we're sitting down at the bar stand and we're having some more food there. No, sitting down and we're having a meal, it's a thing. It's being done properly. So one of those things are that we're going to be talking about food. We're going to be starting off with a sit-down meal. Now, in traditional halacha, in equally historic, the way people would eat, is that a meal would consist of having bread, hence the idea of breaking bread, and the main emphasis of the meal would be the bread, and you would have with the bread something else, maybe a bit of meat, maybe a bit of veg, whatever it was, but the meal was the bread. And bread was the important bit, which is why when we talk about eating, the minute we have bread, we assume that everything else is a tag along to the bread. So we're going to start off with talking about what happens when we eat bread, And then we will go from there to talk about what happens if we're not having bread. We'll talk about Judaism at home. We're going to be talking about what happens if we're having snack, which is also very relevant for today's day and age, where there's lots of snacks going on. There goes. So we're talking about the first thing we do when we're going to eat bread. Now, I say bread, the same could be for pita, it could be for matzah, it could be for challah, but if it's a proper dough that was baked, then it's bread. Whether it's flat cakes, if it's high leavened cakes, whether it's Pesach or it's any other day, matzah or challah, here we talk about bread. So number one, of course, you're going to put on the screen that we have to wash our hands before eating bread. Wash our hands is something we've heard of before. And washing your hands, we're going to say, like last week, which we discussed, washing has to be wrist to fingertips. Washing cup. We're going to talk about all this, and let's go through it step by step. We've got to wash before we eat. We have to prepare the bread first. Why should we prepare the bread before we washed? If the whole concept of washing is to make sure our hands are clean and we don't want to contaminate the bread, why would we prepare the bread first? The assumption is our hands are clean already. We've used soap. Now I open up the wrapper of the packet of bread. If I've got packed sandwiches, I uncover the pack, and now the bread is open. The idea is minimize the delay between the ritual washing associated with the bread and then actually consuming the first bite of bread. Minimize the distraction, the delay. And that's why if I can open up the bread first, I'll do that first. Similarly, on Shabbos, although we want to have a complete loaf, before we make the bracha, we already mark and we start to cut the bread so that the least possible delay between starting to wash and actually eating is allowed. We then go on from that and we say, actually, we're going to have to make a blessing after washing our hands. We have to make sure we're not inside a bathroom and we're going to make bracha. Equally, we're going to do a ritual washing here, not a soap, hygienic washing, and therefore we need a wash cup. And as we said last week, the wash cup cannot have a spout. The wash cup should ideally have at least enough water to wash all the hands, but as a bare minimum, it should be at least a sizable amount that each pour of a hand should cover the entire hand with one cupful. So if we're going to have just a drinking cup, it's got to be a bigger drinking cup that could cover the entire hand with water with each cup, and then you refill. Each pour has to cover the entire hand. So if you have a ring, if you have a plaster, if you have handwriting written on your hands or anything like that, I want to wash that off and remove any disturbance in between. And then, as we said earlier, wrist to fingertips. It's very important. And this is where it gets different. When we washed in the morning, we washed 1, 2, 3, 4, right, left, right, left, right, left. And that's, as we said, as we're trying to chase away the evasive and just springing from hand to hand. However, when it comes to eating bread, there's a very different reason why we're washing. We're not talking why yet. But whatever that reason is, requires us to wash in a different sequence. What's the sequence? 3 times right, 3 times left. Talk about minhagim, customs. Some people only do 2. Ideally, 3 times right, 3 times left. Why do we do right and then left? We spoke last week. We give honor to the right-hand side. But if you're left-handed, then your left hand is your right hand. And therefore, you do your left first and then your right. But for most people, right-handed people, 3 times on the right and 3 times on the left. What is interesting, though, is which hand do I use to pour water on my right hand? Left hand. You can't really pour water on your right hand using your right hand. So which hand is pouring first? The left hand. And there becomes the question, should I give honor to my right hand by washing it first, or should I give honor to my right hand by doing the ritual of washing? Get the question? Which is the more honorable thing? And the answer is, we do both. How do you do both? I lift up the cup in my right hand, pass it to the left hand, and then wash my right hand. So I've given my right hand a chance, and then washed my right hand first. Okay, we're not finished yet. We now washed our right hand, wrist to fingertip, 1, 2, and 3, and then pass the cup to the other hand. Maybe we filled it if we needed it necessary, and then 1, 2, and 3. And what do I do next? I lift my hands up. And at this point, I lift my hands up, chest height, and I say the bracha. The bracha is the same bracha we learned last week. Thank you, Hashem, for giving us connection points with which to connect to you. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvot. You've sanctified us. You've made us connectable. You've made us in a place that we can connect with you through instructions, mitzvahs. And this particular mitzvah you've given to us is to wash our hands. And we say that bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu al netilas yadayim. Now, if you don't know it in English, in Hebrew, you could say it in English, but then train up. Try and say it in Hebrew if you can. And then before we eat, we're not ready yet. You said that wash, said the bracha, we're not finished yet. We now rub our hands and dry them. So leftover water is rubbed, one hand on the other, and then dried till it's completely dry. And as we learned last week, drying is an important part of the process. Most of us want to have our hands dry before we touch bread anyhow, but it's part of the netilas yadayim is to make sure our hands are completely dry, and only after that can we go and eat. But here we said the least possible delay, and that's still included. So therefore, there's no talking between washing our hands and swallowing our first bite. Not just biting the first bite, but swallowing the first bite. No talking. What happens if you do talk? So if anyone here went to KD or had a child who went to KD, the rule is you talk in the line, you talk in the middle, go back to the back of line. I think that's the rule in KD. But the idea is if I've spoken about something, if it was very short, just one word, that's fine. If it was something to do with bread, let's say I say, can I have the salt, please? Or please, can you pass the knife? That's allowed. And that's not considered a delay because you're talking about the bread. So it's connected to the bread rather than delaying something else. But now I hold the bread, I say the bracha, and I eat. And just before I eat, I dip it into salt. I dip the bread into salt. Now we haven't done any wise. But we've learned the procedure. I'm just going to go back, put this on the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Prepare the bread, use a wash cup, make sure there's nothing on your hands and your hands are clear. Make sure you're pouring from wrist to fingertips, 3 times right, 3 times left, unless you're left-handed. And then we lift our hands, say the bracha, rub them and dry them. No talking until swallowing the first bite. Hold the bread and make the bracha. Dip it 3 times in salt. And now you're ready to go. This is what it takes. Talk about rules about how to eat a piece of bread. And I remember as a young child, I may have been 8 or 9 years old, sitting on a train, and I was shocked that there are people who don't do all these things. The person on the other side was just eating a sandwich. Couldn't believe it. And that's the beauty of being given the gift that I was given, that my parents taught me this. But that's no excuse, or it's not a exclusive right. All of us can try and train up so that it becomes second nature. Each one of these steps just become, we can do it even without thinking. Of course, we want to think, but it becomes way of eating. When it becomes the way of eating, then yes, we have self-discipline through our food. We are connecting with Hashem through our food. And more importantly, our food is bringing us closer to Hashem. We've done a fair bit. We're now going to just go into, for a few moments, discuss some of the reasons for some of these rituals so that they become more meaningful. But this is the order of eating bread, which is the main part of a meal. Okay. Washing our hands. Why would we wash our hands? So in the morning we washed our hands because as we were sleeping, it was like it was equivalent or similar to the opposite of life, to death, and death is considered impure, and that's why we wash our hands, which is the most external part of our body. When it comes to eating bread isn't when we wake up in the morning. It's more to it than that. And for this, we have a different reason. The reason why we wash our hands when we're eating bread is because eating, as we said, is a spiritual journey. And we compare it to those people who ate food in the Beis Hamikdash, in the house of Hashem, as representatives of the Almighty. Now, of course, Hashem doesn't eat food. Hashem doesn't need food. Hashem creates food and the consumer of the food and everything else in between. But Hashem asks his service people, the Kohanim, to eat certain parts of the offerings, the gifts that are brought to him, including the terumah. And that's why the Kohanim would have to eat the terumah in a state of extreme purity. And when they did, they would have to wash their hands every time before they eat. the bread that was donated to Hashem. Teruma was donated from every time someone made a dough, they would have to donate the challah. Whenever someone had grain, they grew a field, so the first 50th or 60th was donated, which is 2% roughly, was donated to the Kohanim, and that had to be eaten in extreme purity and could only be eaten in Jerusalem. It was a very special gift. They had to wash their hands. Now, when we're not in the habit of washing our hands, it becomes tricky to not forget. But just like in the first weeks of where COVID-19 became lockdown, or even before that, washing our hands, there were signs all over the place and constant reminders. Hopefully by now, people remember even without that many signs because it's become part of our habit, part of our routine. Keeping it part of routine is necessary to make sure that we don't slip and forget. And therefore, the rule is enacted that not just when it comes to teruma bread, but Kohanim should wash their hands even if they're eating any bread. They should get into the habit that whenever they're eating bread, they should wash their hands. And when they saw that that was good but not good enough, they extended it. And they said not just Kohanim should wash their hands for every bread, all Jewish people should wash their hands every time they're eating any bread. Which effectively meant if a Kohen goes to visit his cousin who's a non-Kohen and they're breaking bread together, everybody washes their hands. And that way the Kohen keeps into the habit, and that way everybody, we can keep the hand washing important. What this teaches me is that although today we don't have teruma, and therefore Kohanim are eating teruma, and therefore when they wash their hands, they're washing their hands almost for no reason. All of us wash our hands, and this is the rule, before eating bread, so that please God, very soon, when the Beis Hamikdash Mashiach comes back, and the Kohanim once again are eating bread, which is holy, we'll still have the habit front and center, and we wouldn't have forgotten. So when I wash my hands next time for eating bread, number one, I can remind myself that I'm hoping and praying, I'm keeping the habit alive because Mashiach is coming soon. One. Number two, very important, is the reason why I'm washing my hands is so that the Kohen shouldn't forget. What does it tell me about today's current climate? Even if I say, oh, I'm not scared of COVID-19, I'm not scared of Corona, so what? Wear a mask. Keep the government guidelines, because it's not only about me. I should wash my hands to protect somebody else. And protecting somebody else is the letter of the law. How beautiful. 2,000 years ago, encoded into halacha of eating bread was already the idea where I wash my hands so that the kohen should be protected. I wash my hands hygienically equally so that everyone else should be protected as well. So important, so special. This is an interesting reason why we should wash our hands. Of course, remember to do it with a washing cup because this is a ritual washing. And just like hygienic washing has ways that it works, and if we don't do it properly, it doesn't work properly. Equally, washing our hands for ritual washing needs to be done properly. Okay, here's another interesting thing, a little deeper. And that is, there's another reason why we should wash our hands. I think a lot of us can relate to this concept. Struggle in the same sentence as food. Food and struggle. Today, I say today, in the past 20, 30 years, has become enormous. The diet industry is booming. Self-help books, gurus, just do this, that, and this, that, and the other. Swallow this pill 20 minutes before you eat, and you can eat whatever you want. The pounds, the kilos are just going to be pouring off you, and all that kind of idea. What does it show us? It shows that people are struggling with food. Well, the Zohar classically tells us, Kabbalah tells us, that everything in this world is a reflection of what's going up in the spiritual realms. And we can appreciate that there's a spiritual struggle every time we're eating food. Amazingly, the struggle for here is a reflection of a spiritual challenge. This challenge that Zohar is going to tell us is the struggle between eating for self or eating for a purpose. Is my food indulgence, or is my food a tool to become a better person? If I had to do this to myself, I'd rather not. But if I had to and ask myself, whatever I consumed the past 24 hours, was it self-centered or God-centered? Was it because I like it and I enjoyed it, or because I was bored or lazy? Well, it was because I was on a mission. That's why I ate it. And washing my hands before that is a chance to become mindful of what I'm doing. How special. Here's another amazing thing. Lechem, which is, as we said, is the basic food. In halacha, lechem means bread, or in this context, food. It's spelled lamed ches mem, which is the same word as lochem, war. Because shas, this is a quote from the Zohar, I didn't make this up myself. Shas sloisa, shas karava. When a person is, not shas sloisa is davening. When a person is eating bread, it's a time of war, of struggle. And the struggle is, will I become lower? Will I degrade myself by this exercise? Or am I going to be elevating the food and myself through this exercise? Is this a way up or a way down? So in order to make this work, we're going to talk about two general struggles when it comes to food. And here's where it gets a little interesting. We're going to run by the first one a little quicker because it's most of it is some stuff we've heard already. And then we're going to get to the second part, which is the reasons for things. And that's a little bit more longer. On the page, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 45 roughly. Is that right? 9 by 5? It looks like it. Wow. Different kosher symbols. And each one of these kosher symbols are not just a stamp. Kosher symbol does not mean that there was a rabbi who came into a factory and blessed the factory, because the kosher symbol has nothing to do with blessings. There's actually no blessings to make on a kosher symbol. Blessings are made on eating and consuming food. But each one of these kosher symbols would have, and they symbolize, an entire infrastructure of people who understand the chain of food, and they understand how factories work, and they will be going to supervise what goes on in a factory for ingredients, sub-ingredients. So if something's made up of 15 different ingredients, they'll have to go back and check each one of those 15 sub-ingredients. And more times than not, it's much more complex than that. What else is running on the same plant? So if it's a canning factory, what canned before this and before that? So if there's flavoring inside these machines that are unkosher, has it contaminated the run of this type of food? And of course, they're going to have to make sure that there's no substitute products. If something's short, that they're still only using kosher products. Now, all of these points, ingredients, machinery, and which includes also the oils that are used in the machines, etc., and substitutes, when something's short or something's not available, what they use instead as a secondary second lineup, are constant issues. And each one of these kosher symbols are symbols that they will have people who are constantly in constant contact with all the factories that they are supervising and certifying. And these are one of the things that we'll have to take into account. Locally, here in Manchester, we are blessed with two fantastic hechsherim. You've got the Manchester Pastin and the Mechzik Hadas. Probably the Manchester Pastin is far more common, and it's both of them are very reliable. And gratefully, we are thankful to Hashem of the blessings that we have here. And we have great hechsherim. I just want to put on the screen two things that could look like a hechsher and are absolutely not a hechsher. And that is, some packagings have an R with an O around it. And that just means registered trademark. It doesn't have anything to do with kosher. So if you see a pack with an R and an O around it, it's not kosher R or anything like that. Although you might have an OK and an OU and a Kaf K or whatever else it is. That is not a kosher symbol. And then also sometimes you'll have a packet that'll have just a K. Now the K is federal government or government agencies that are suggesting that this item is kosher, but on a rabbinic level, it really doesn't cut. Just because if you imagine someone who has a peanut allergy, and we say, well, this has basically got no peanuts in it. If I'm actually allergic to peanuts, I'm not going to take that and say, well, because it's probably got no peanuts in it, and it's not supposed to have peanuts in it, and therefore it's okay. If I really got an allergy, I'll say, hold on one second, I need to know that it really doesn't have peanuts in it. Well, we're allergic to non-kosher, like even non-kosher flavoring. Even if it's not got real chazarai in it, but if it's got the flavor of it, that's equally not compatible with my system, and that's why the K is definitely not reliable. Interesting, if you had a OK with a little D next to it, it's good to know. That would mean it's OK dairy. which number one tells you can't eat it with anything meaty, which we'll talk about soon, but also it tells us that if you want to have the higher level of milky food, which is Chalav Yisrael, that would not be included unless it's specified clearly. Okay? If anyone has any questions, please do ask. We're going to be talking about milk and meat. Obviously, as you can see, this burger has cheese on it. And the reason why there's an X is because the cheese is milky cheese. This cheese is made by milk. If it's made from milk and the meat is made from meat, then it's not kosher to have milk and meat together, as we know. Put some rules on the screen here. Poultry, so birds, chicken included in meat, and therefore chicken and cheese or chicken and milk is not allowed. Chicken pizza, individual placemats. If you're eating on the same table, you have to have separate placemats, because eating it not only on the same plate, but eating at the same sitting, unless it's obviously strangers, but two people sitting at the same table, and one's having milk and one's having meat, should be separated either by a different table, but as a minimum as different placemats. Pots, ovens, crockery, if they're milky, they're not meaty, and if they're meaty, they're not milky, because the flavoring that will pass through on these things will pass from one to the other, and therefore you'd have milk flavored meat, which is not kosher, or meat flavored milk, which is also not kosher. Sinks and dishwashers is maybe perhaps the least known one. Having separate sinks that I'm washing hot water in, if it's milky, then it's going to be having milk, hot milk flavoring the sink, and that could spread. An easy way around that is that if I only have one dishwasher, nominated it to the more common, maybe I'm using more meat than milk, I'll make it the meaty dishwasher. And then for the sink, the easy way around is just to have an insert that goes inside the sink, and that way I'll have a milky one and a meaty one. Towels and tablecloths, no problem. You can have the same tablecloth and the same towels for milk and meat, although there are many people that don't. But the minute I finish using one, I put it into the wash, it is totally cleaned out, and therefore it's kashered each time it's cleaned. Although you don't want to have milk and meat at the same time, which we don't do anyhow. Towels and tablecloths generally are fine either way, but as we said, there are people, there's room there to be extra careful. What happens if something becomes non-kosher? So there's a kashering process. Here you can see a rabbi has come, he's pouring boiling hot water, and part of what they learn is the laws of how to make something kosher, and more importantly, they also learn chamira, sakanta, miyusura. It's more important to stay safe than anything else of the kosher process. And that's the law, and that's why he has to learn health and safety first. Kashering, residue. If there's anything dirty, that cannot be kashered. If there's clear, visible dirt, can't be kashered, washed off. Most common place to find that as an issue is if I need to kasher an oven. If you ever looked at the back of your oven, if you've got a fan in that oven, if you look behind the grill, even after you've put on the best spray and you've wiped everything down, the back of that oven, especially the seals around the oven, usually have food residue. It's sticky, it's gooey, and that is not kosher status. You can't kosher if it's got meaty or unkosher residue. It has to be richly cleaned off entirely. So the fan behind the grill would have to be clean and all that. If you have a self-cleaning oven, you'll find at the end of the clean, there's ash. That's the ash, that residue being burnt away, and that has to be cleaned before the koshering process can take place. The idea of the koshering is to remove not so much the dirt, but the flavoring within the material of the actual food preparing item. And that's why boiling heat is necessary, and that boiling heat is equivalent to the type of heat with which it became non-kosher. So in an oven, it would have to be oven heat. If it's a stovetop here or a countertop, that would have to be boiling heat, and that's equivalent. New items have to go into a mikveh, ritual bath. They have to be dipped inside. And that is separate to koshering. Nothing to do with kosher, brand new. I buy something fresh off the thing, I have to kosher it. What happens if I buy something that's secondhand? Very often in the catering business, that's the case, where I'm buying a secondhand item. So if I have, let's say, a ladle that was very good ladle, and I paid £450 for one ladle because it's so brilliant. I don't know why you would do that, but let's say you did. You'd have to kosher it because it came from a non-kosher home. And in addition to that, you'd have to go into the mikveh because there's two things happening. It's brand new and new for me. It's new for me, and therefore goes into the keli mikveh, and it's used in the past for non-kosher, therefore needs kashering. One doesn't help for the other. Koshering is not instead of mikveh, and mikveh is not instead of koshering, And that's something that I find people tend to get mixed up with. Okay, one more thing is the waiting time. If I've had, how long should I wait before having milk? The simple answer is 6 hours. The more complicated answer is you can get away, according to some opinions, with 3 hours. And there's even a shorter opinion that says 1 hour, but that's only for the extreme yakas. But generally, it's 6 hours or at least 3 hours after eating meat before eating milk. If I finish my pizza, how long should I wait before eating meat? So there is a very common custom, which is to wash hands and clean mouth. And that's enough. Although when it comes to hard cheese, and that's not just what we call hard cheese, but proper aged cheese, then we would say, sorry?
To say half an hour for meat to milk.
From meat to milk or milk to meat?
From milk to meat, you have to wait half an hour.
Yeah, we're going to get to the half an hour or an hour according to the Zohar. Well, you know, let's put it on the screen right now. The Zohar talks about a custom of 1 hour, and there's another custom that says half an hour. The idea is that we don't let it mix. And the discussion is, how long do we have to wait before the taste in our mouth for the system to have a good go at it? The idea is that meat lingers for longer, both in the stomach and in the mouth, whereas cheese not so much. But the hard cheese, yes. And that's why the hard cheese, which we have on the screen, would be also 6 hours, according to these opinions. Okay, we're going to put how or what we can eat aside. We're now going to move on to the second struggle, which is how we eat. We do know that the very first sin in human history, help me out. It's on the screen. If those of us haven't on the screen, what's the very first sin in human history?
Chava, eating.
And Adam. Let's not blame the well. Yes, very good. The answer is she ate from the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge. What was the tree of knowledge is irrelevant. Although we often hear Adam's apple. The apple is not one of the options throughout the Jewish commentary. Grapes is, chita is, pomegranate is. There's many different options or commentaries. 5, I think, generally. But let's just say for the tree of knowledge was forbidden. If you read the parasha, it seems like there was 2 trees that they weren't allowed to eat from. There was actually 1 tree they couldn't eat from, the tree of knowledge. Once they'd eat from the tree of knowledge, they then were, Hashem says, I don't want him to now eat from the tree of life, which is the second tree. Once they ruined the tree of knowledge, I want to make sure, Hashem says, I want to make sure I don't want Adam to eat from the tree of life, which was permissible up until now. And therefore he threw him out of the garden. But that idea where the tree of knowledge was the challenge, and the opposite of the tree of knowledge is the tree of life. There's a beautiful commentary I want to share with you. Reb Tzadok of Lublin. He says, what was the big deal with the tree of knowledge? Come on, tree of knowledge is like such a miraculous tree. All of a sudden, the whole thing goes to pot and the whole world turns over. What sort of tree is this? Says Reb Tzadok of Lublin, perhaps there wasn't 2 trees. There was 2 ways to eat anything. Whatever we're eating could be either eating it like the tree of knowledge or eating it like the tree of life. It says Reb Tzadok of Lublin, knowledge is power. Knowledge is great, but knowledge is self-serving. He says in Hebrew, it's even more. Eitz hadas, yediyah, is where I take the knowledge from me, I connect it with me. So he says the tree of life is eating for the sake of life. Life meaning not just to stay alive, not die. Life is purpose, versus tree of knowledge, says Reb Tzadok of Lublin, is eating for myself. And this was the battle. Should I eat for me, or should I be eating for purpose? Self-centered versus God-centered. That was the struggle of Adam and Chava. And when she ate the tree of knowledge because she saw it looked good and it tasted good, when he indulged in eating from the tree of knowledge, that's where he dropped the bar. Now food wasn't just in order to become a better person. Food was actually a weight dragging them down rather than being a float that would help them grow. And this is where it started changing. Instead of us controlling the food that we eat, food becomes now controlling us. So there's this thing, the default setting now became, ever since the sin, that food, eating time, is now tends to be a self-centered exercise. And the challenge is to try and break away from that. Now this is the biological hunger is actually a spiritual starvation, which is the Baal Shem Tov's answer. What can we do about it? So I want to share with you a story. story of the Baal Shem Tov, where the Baal Shem Tov once sent one of his students and said to him, please travel to such and such a place. And when you're there, you'll already know what to do, which was quite common for the Baal Shem Tov. He didn't specify exactly what had to be done. And the student travels all the way out. When he gets there, he has no clue what he has to do. So he sits around, he hangs around, has a drink, davens a bit. And when all else fails, he heads back. He says to the Baal Shem Tov, I went there, I looked around, I see if there's someone there. There was nobody there. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, well, what do you do while you're there? He said, I learned a bit, had a drink. Oh, you had a drink from the stream, right? He's like, yeah. And you made a bracha of it. He's like, of course I made a bracha. How am I going to have a drink without thanking Hashem? He says, that's all it was. The stream, since the beginning of creation, has never had anyone drink that water and make a bracha. And the stream needed an upgrade, a lift, to be elevated, to do something special with it. And that was what you managed to achieve by drinking it. That story is the story of every time we engage in the exercise called eating and drinking. It's our opportunity to bring up, to elevate, to make purposeful the entire food chain.
Levi.
Yes, please.
I don't know, maybe we will touch upon it later on, but
Yes.
listening to you, I'm always thinking food and indulgence, they go into opposite directions. But shouldn't you have a little bit of indulgence in your food? It shouldn't be just to sustain you. You should, okay, maybe not every time that you eat, you should indulge, but from time to time, you should have something really nice to uplift your spirits.
Rabbi Yoina, I love the question. Should we sometimes have good food? I'm going to say, I vote that we should always have good food.
Yeah.
Every time. The only difference and we're suggesting is the mindset. Why am I eating the best food? Whatever food. Why am I eating is the shift. We're not suggesting have bad food. No. That was Abtada's idea. It wasn't two different trees. It was the same exact food. And the question is, what is driving me to eat it? Why do I want to eat food? So I think that I'm going to borrow what you just said there. If I need a boost, a lift on emotional, and I know if I'm going to have some food right now, I'll be less tense, I'll be calmer, I'll be able to think straighter. What a wonderful reason to eat. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm making myself productive. What I've done is I've allowed myself to see past self-indulgence. I'm saying I'm going to eat now, I'm going to feed myself so that. Brilliant. Fantastic. Now I've put spiritual destiny in that food. And that spiritual destiny in that food comes because as a human being, eating isn't a necessary evil. No. Eating is an opportunity to make food the tool with which I'm going to be productive. So let's just use your example again. If I'm in a bad mood, but I know because I'm hungry, that's why I'm in a bad mood. So now I sit down and have a good pastrami sandwich, and it's delicious with the mustard and everything, and I get involved. Every drop of mustard on that pastrami has now become part of everything that I'm going to do with a renewed energy. How fantastic. How uplifting for the worker in the mustard plant that bottled this mustard. Or the guy who built the machine 20 years ago has now got an uplift because he managed to create something that created mustard that went on your sandwich, which has now helped uplift everything. Wow. Every bite of food is an opportunity.
And from the Kabbalah point of view, of course, you're raising not whatever you're eating, you're bringing at the upper level.
Correct.
There's 4 levels, isn't there?
Absolutely. But one second, we're not getting carried away in levels.
Okay.
How can we rise to this challenge, to this struggle? That every time we eat, it should be me controlling the food rather than the food controlling me. And one of the steps we take is washing our hands before we eat. We become a little bit mindful and we say to ourselves, wash my hands like the Kohanim. I'm here to serve. I'm in service right now. I'm doing something meaningful right now. And that's why I wash my hands before I eat. It's a step that's going to remind us of being more meaningful. I just want to throw in here, we use water. Water reminds us of Torah, which is often compared to water. We wash our hands because our hands are the most active, but also our hands are external. If I have to do something outside of myself, my hands are always getting involved in external stuff. Well, it's the external influences or that are dragging me down. That's why I wash the part of me that is most likely to be involved in externalities, and I wash before I eat, because eating could very easily be animalistic. I eat, the animal eats. What's going to make me stand out? So before I eat, I wash my hands, and I eat before I'm making my meal time, which is the main meal time, an opportunity to be mindful meals. Okay, we're now going to move along into the brachas. If anyone has any questions or observations, please do ask. But in the meantime, I'm going to go along with the brachas. Before we eat anything, we do two things. It's two things in one. We ask permission. God Almighty, you are the creator. I ask permission for you to eat it. But also, I thank you for giving me the food that sustains me, which is why the opening of all the brachas, from all the foods are, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. We're blessing you. Blessing is thank you, but also acknowledging that God is the King. And therefore, we're acknowledging that everything belongs to Hashem. And from there, we have fill in the blank. Now, fill in the blank on the next slide is going to give us 6 options. I'm going to try and simplify it, but anything we're eating or drinking will be one of those 6 options. Those 6 options are different and unique to each type of food that we have. But let's start off with saying 6 divides into 3 in 2s. So there'll be 2, 2, 2. 2 blessings over fruits, 2 types of fruits. 2 types of meal food, grain-based food, and 2 types of drinks in the rest. Okay? We'll simplify it like that. Let's start off with this is the permission and the thanks. And of course, as we make a bracha, it's going to help us be mindful. It's going to help you be present. There's beautiful Kuzari that talks about the person who was out on went out to the restaurant on a date and got drunk. And the next morning, the poor individual has 0 recollection or appreciation for the meal, for the company, for the experience, because they were drunk. Their mind wasn't there. And that's what he says. Before we start eating, we should do steps, wash our hands, make a bracha to help us stop being drunk. Let us appreciate, get involved in the spiritual exercise, such as meals, so that we're not drunk on selfishness or self-centeredness. Instead, we're able to be mindful what's going on as we eat, hence the bracha. Okay, this is the chart. It's in the Hebrew in the middle, translated on the left. Translated on the right, and the category on the left. So on the left-hand side, it says for fruit of a tree, Barei Priya Eitz. For a vegetable, fruit of a plant, Barei Priya Adama. First 2. 2 types of fruits. One is the fruit that grows in a tree, and one fruit that comes from the ground, a vegetable, or from a plant. What's the difference between a plant and a tree? Generally speaking, if it lasts through the winter. Your apple tree lasts through the winter, and next summer, spring, it's going to sprout more apples. Your tomato plant doesn't last through the winter, and next spring, I need to plant a new tomato bush, a tomato plant. And that will be the difference between vegetables and fruit in the halachic category. And that's why we say one bracha Barei Priya Eitz and one bracha is Barei Priya Ha'adama. Okay, we're going to learn this, and then I'm going to throw you a few questions, quiz questions, to see how well you do. Set of 2 blessings are going to be Borei Mina Mezonos for food made from wheat, barley, oat, spelt, or rye. 5 grains, wheat, barley, oat, spelt, or rye. And those are Borei Mina Mezonos with the exception of if it's already become a bread. So if it's been baked like a bread or matzah, when it's a proper dough and baked, then it becomes Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, and that is the 2 grain-based brachas. So, for example, if you are having pancakes and there's flour in there, pancakes are not a bread, they would be Borei Mina Mezonos. But if you had a lafa, or you had, a pita, or you had a challah roll, or you had just a plain nut, those would all be hamotzi. A baguette would be hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We have 2 types of drinks, the regular drink and the special drink. The special drink, in Jewish faith, special drink is not beer, it's not tea, not Coca-Cola. The special drink is
Wine.
Wine or grape juice. Halachic grape juice is like wine, and wine or grape juice is the upgrade, and that is the Borei Pri Hagafen. Borei Pri Hagafen is the higher bracha, and any other drink, which includes your orange juice, your water, milk, whatever else you might be drinking, as well as anything that does not fit into any of the above categories. Give you an example. Meat. Meat doesn't grow from the ground, from the tree. It's not a grain, and it's not a bread, and it's not wine. That would be the all-inclusive bracha. Shakol. Okay, so quick question here. It's quiz question number 1. You don't have to answer out loud if you don't want to. You can just give yourself a score. I'm going to give you a couple of questions. Question number 1. What bracha do you make on a hard-boiled egg?
Shakol.
Shakol is the right bracha. We're winning. Okay, what bracha would you make on a banana?
Hadama.
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 Hadama is the right answer because it grows from a tree. It is a banana tree. What's amazing about the banana tree is that the banana tree doesn't last through the winter. Sorry?
It's got that mixed up, Steve. I thought it was from the tree, but it's not. I thought it's from the Adamah.
So, Borei Pri Hadama is the right bracha for a banana, although bananas grow on a banana tree. But halachata, I have to throw in a twister, I'm sorry. The banana tree is the tree that doesn't last through the winter. It has to grow new branches each spring. And although the tree remains, but the branches that give forth bananas grow anew each year. So it's not just the bananas that are growing new, it's the branches. That is one of the most complicated bracha questions you can get. The other complicated one is the raspberry. Now, I don't know the full ins and outs, but there are multiple opinions about the raspberry, whether it's Hadama or Eitz. But let's ask you a different question. What's a strawberry?
Eitz.
So if you said Hadama, you got the right answer because all berries are Ha'etz. All berries grow from a tree-like bush, except for strawberries. And the other one I'm going to ask you is, what bracha do you make on walnuts? They don't grow on walls.
Shakol.
The walnuts grow on trees or tree-like things, and therefore it would be ha'etz. All nuts are ha'etz, are tree fruits, except for, anyone know?
Peanut.
Peanuts. There we go. All nuts are ha'etz except for peanuts. So all berries are ha'etz. This guy is for strawberries, and all nuts are nuts. Sorry, all nuts are tree fruits except for peanuts. Okay, we're doing well. One
So
more.
what is peanuts? Sorry, what is peanuts then?
Peanuts is
Ground.
Ground.
Underground.
On the ground.
Okay.
Correct. Very good. Let's do one more. Let's do watermelons. You've never seen a watermelon tree? Thank goodness I've never walked into a watermelon tree. Just imagine what happens when the watermelon falls off the tree. No, there are no watermelon trees. There never has been, and there never will be a watermelon tree. It's actually a song. It's Ha'adamah. That is the right answer. There are some other tricky questions to get along, but without running throughout for time, we're going to move along. We're going to say there are some wonderful apps you can download on your phone. There's also a website, or you has a website that gives you the brachas if you're not sure which bracha is. I've found Google is quite useful. If you just say, what bracha is banana, it will come up. You can't rely on it. You've got to check where the source is. But more times than not, the right answers are in there. So,
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
What happens if you just, by chance, you said the wrong bracha and you realise that kind of, you said the wrong one?
First of all, if a zap of lightning doesn't come down and strike you dead, you're absolutely, yes. Question's a great question. The answer is the fact that you care is already tremendous, and that's great. The short answer is if the bracha you made was more inclusive than the correct bracha, then it's fine. So the order of inclusiveness would be shahakol, ha'adama, ha'etz, mezonot, and hamoitzi. So if you made a shahakol by mistake on something, that would work after the fact.
Right.
Okay. Hamoitzi includes the whole meal, with the exception of wine and dessert. As we said earlier, when you're sitting down to eat bread, you're eating a meal and everything else is included. But wine is always unique, and therefore you make it special. As you said, it's the national drink, or it's the not national drink, but it's the special drink, the sacred drink. And then you have desserts. Desserts are not considered part of the meal. They're considered an add-on, and therefore you could make a bracha after your meal. You can have your dessert. So if you're having ice cream or you're having a fruit, that would be good. Sorry?
Done that, sorry.
Okay. Well, the other thing is, when you're making a bracha, again, we want to make sure, minimize the delay in between. So have the food prepared before. It doesn't help to look at the bracha and read it with your eyes. We're talking about saying, reciting, being mindful, and therefore you vocalize the bracha. We swallow at least the first bite before we talk, because until we haven't swallowed the bite, we might have started eating it, but it's not classed as properly eating until we've swallowed it, and we only make one bracha per sitting. So let's say I have an apple whilst I'm listening to a shir, and then 20 minutes later I'm having a tangerine. That's the same fruit bracha, because apples grow on a tree and tangerines grow on a tree, and therefore I don't make another one. If I stop the sitting, say I go for a walk and come back, or I got up and I stopped doing what I was doing, I made enough bracha, so then I have opportunity to say a second one. But generally speaking, if it's one sitting, I just make one bracha. Another good example would be a tea. I'm sipping on the tea. So long as I haven't got up and left, even if the tea's gone cold, I'm still sipping the same tea. It's one shak, only a bidvara, carries me all the way through, and that includes all types of foods. Okay. Any questions before we go?
Yeah, if somebody can hear you, if somebody hears you, saying your bracha, so they can say amen to the bracha.
They can say amen, but they should still make their own bracha if they're going to go on and drink themselves. Yeah, so it doesn't exempt someone else. Very few exceptions to that. One would be kiddush because it's the mitzvah. Okay, we're going to quickly put on the board here some of the things we do to make our mealtime holy. Remember we spoke last week that when we sit down to eat, our table is like the altar in the temple. And if we eat correctly, it brings atonement and it brings this connection to Hashem. Some of the things we do to make it holy. Excuse me. So one of the things brought down in the halacha is when we can, especially now, it's been 3 months, but when we can, we should try and have guests at our meal, because then we're like Abraham Avinu, who's bringing guests to his house. We should encourage, and we're very strongly encourage that every time we sit down to eat, some words of Torah should be shared. It could be a 20-second idea. It could be an audio you might be listening to. It could be something interesting you heard you want to talk about. But something of Torah should elevate the table. Just a quick joke, but they talk about the 2 yeshiva boys who were studying in New York and won the raffle to go to Israel. And there they are touring up and down the Holy Land, their homeland they've never been before. And they walk into this beautiful orchard. And this orange is growing from the tree. And one of us says, oh, so it's beautiful oranges. He picks an orange and he's peeling the orange. And all of a sudden he hears someone say in Hebrew. He's never heard someone speak in Hebrew, just regular words. He's an American. And the guy's saying, lo tignov, lo tignov. It's a quote from the Ten Commandments. Do not steal. There you go. So he's saying, lo tignov. He's calmly eating the orange and he's smiling. And the guy's screaming, lo tignov, katuv b'Torah. Says in the verse. And finally he finishes the orange. He says this, it's amazing. Here in Israel, you could be eating an orange and you're hearing words of Torah being shouted at you wherever you go. So that's the idea. We should share words of Torah. We should say something meaningful, something uplifting, because that way we're making our meal meaningful. We're making it like the altar. That's the other thing. Do the stuff that we said about transforming it. So say the brachas, make sure what I'm eating is kosher, and try and have in mind not just selfish motives, but try and be conscious that when I'm eating, this is going to help me be more productive. Intention. That all transforms the food we have. Washing our hands with a cup, again, it reminds me I'm in service. This is the last point, which is putting salt on the table. Having salt on the table is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law. When we sit down to eat, there should be salt on the table. It goes a step further. It says actually we should try and dip the bread into salt, but that's more important than dipping the salt is having salt on the table, even if I don't dip in it. Why should we have salt on our table? Good question. Anyone? Why should we have salt on the table when we're eating?
Remember the destruction of the temple, yeah?
Okay, if you put salt on a wound, it hurts. Perhaps that's it. No, that's a connection. I haven't seen that being written anywhere else, but there is, remember the temple. Go on.
Melach, melech, melech.
Melach is spelled with a ches, means salt. Different than melech, as in David HaMelech, spelled with a chaf, which is David HaMelech, which is king. But melach with a salt is an eternal bris, the eternal covenant, pact that Hashem made with salt, that there will always be salt on the altar. In the Beis HaMikdash, every offering that went onto the temple altar had to have salt in it. It was actually forbidden. It was a crime. It was against the law to put anything on the altar without putting salt. And therefore, it was salt stations on the way up that every Kohen bringing something up the altar had salt on it. And therefore, we have salt as well to remind us, A, of the altar, but also the concept of having an eternal covenant. Who else has an eternal covenant with Hashem? The Jewish people. And having salt on the table is a sign of endurance, that we still are here. And we have salt when we're sitting down to eat to remind ourselves that this is Yiddishkeit. And another, perhaps a slightly more meaningful way, is that we are looking to find taste, depth, meaning in everything in life. And that's why when you add salt to a dish, it brings more taste to it. Salt adds taste. We're looking to add taste to everything we're doing, even if it's as mundane as just having a meal. Interestingly, we dip the bread into the salt rather than sprinkle salt onto the bread. And that has mystical connotation. And that is because salt is gevura. The bread that we're eating is chesed. We mentioned this when we were talking about right over left. Right is the kindness side. Gevura, which is the severity, is the left side. Salt, which is stronger taste, is the gevura. And we take the bread and put it on top of the salt so that the chesed should shower upon the gevura. And thereby, in a small little move, we ask Hashem to be extra kind with us. Says the Zohar, dip your bread in the salt rather than sprinkle the salt on your bread. Interesting fun fact.
Levi,
Okay. Yes, please.
can you please repeat what is Gevura?
Gevura is severity, strictness,
But it's also meant in a good sense.
in a very good sense. Correct. Example would be when there's, the example brought down in the Zohar is strong rain. So if it's just trickling, that's giving, but it's not what we need. Gevura is that when it's fit, it's measured. In simple words, Gevura is that you get what you deserve. And get what you deserve oftentimes is very good. Kindness is, I don't care what you deserve, you get what I want to give you. So Gevura takes into consideration the recipient's position, and Chesed takes into consideration only the giver's position. Two different modes of conduct that Hashem runs the world by.
Can you
I hope
say
that
justice?
Justice, yeah. I think justice is perhaps, yeah, justice would fall into Gevura, correct? I'm thinking of a different word that just doesn't come to mind, and that is, it still doesn't come to mind, judgment. Yeah, okay, justice, let's go with justice. Let's go with that, I like it. Did we answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Good, okay. Moving along, we're going to throw in some interesting halachas about food, which include eating appropriately, what we would call manners. They're actually literally manners. Don't eat when you're standing, all that. But we're not going to get into that right now. Right now, we're talking about eating healthily. Number one, no talking with food in my mouth. That's in the halacha. Number two, eat slowly. Don't stuff my mouth. Eat when I'm hungry. Yona, you see this? The halacha tells us that you eat when I'm hungry, but it goes further, says the Rambam. I shouldn't eat more than 3/4 full. I shouldn't stuff myself that I can't eat anymore and I'm dropping. I should eat, and I should leave myself a little bit hungry. I don't know, you measure 3/4. My daughter, she's 4 years old, tells me I'm only full up to here. So you can't have dessert. So no, it just went down. It's down here, right? That's how it works. 3/4 full. But one more other thing that the Rambam writes, he says overeating. Did I spell it right? Overeating. Overeating brings illness. And he lists a whole bunch of illnesses that come because people eat too much. And he says, like a statistic, most illnesses come from people overeating. But eating healthy is in the halacha. Don't forget, we're eating because we're on a mission. We've got to do it properly. Then there's another set of laws, which is respecting food. Respecting food means we don't chuck food on the floor. And if we see food on the floor, we lift it up. We don't throw food, because if the food can become inedible or ruined, there are certain customs that sometimes you do throw food. In shul, sometimes they chuck sweets, and it's important to not throw sweets that don't have a wrapper or that can get squashed. Equally, I believe there's certain customs to throw the bread on Friday night when instead of cutting it with a knife and passing it, some people have the custom of ripping it and throwing it, and that's perfectly acceptable, providing that it doesn't become inedible. Not passing things over food that could spill onto the food and ruin it. Example there is if you're passing a cup of wine, don't pass it over the bread, so the bread shouldn't get ruined. And not using wine or something else as a cleaning agent. Respect for the food. And then not using it for a decor, that would make it inedible. The book that I was reading was the Ben Ish Chai, and he writes particularly in his case where there were people using all sorts of fruits that were stands for flowers, and they weren't there for food. They were just being using food as to hold up the flowers and then chucked out. And he was saying that that's not okay, because really what you're doing is you're taking food that deserves respect and misusing it, degrading it to something less than food. Okay, so that's a little bit about food in general. Any questions before we move on to benching? Not yet? Don't be embarrassed, don't be afraid. You can put it on the chat.
Remark.
Please.
From Indian culture, they even not put food on the floor. Any food products should not stand on the floor.
Okay.
So it should be somewhere above the ground level.
Interesting. It's similar there. Yeah, storing food in health and safety rules. You can't store food on the floor either. It's got to be a certain distance raised above the ground, pallets and stuff, as we know. Okay, we're going to move on to benching, and that's going to be the last step of tonight's class. And then if we have time, I would like to summarize what we did, so we're not going walking in the dark. Benching. Benching is which language? What does benching mean in English?
Yiddish.
I like the word Yiddish. Yes. What does it mean in German?
I don't think it means anything.
I love it.
It's more of
Blessing.
Bench
It's
is
blessing.
Blessing. I don't know what the answer is, but I know in English, when you're benching a certain amount of kilos, it means you're doing well in the gym, right? Yeah. Okay. But when we say benching tonight, we mean the Yiddish, as Jonas says, the Yiddish version of benching. And some of us work really hard to lift all those kilos of food and put it inside our stomachs. It's not an easy job. We've got to chew it and swallow it, all the different exercises that we do. And then we do benching. What's benching? Benching is grace after meals. Or as they say in Israel,
Birkat Hamazon.
Birkat Hamazon. Birkat Hamazon means thanking Hashem, blessing God for the food. Mazon is food. Before we start benching, traditionally in the bencher, there will be a page that has a commemoration of the destruction and a request for the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. It's not part of benching itself, but in the weekdays, it's literally a quote of the morning of the destruction. We were crying the rivers of Babylon. And then on Shabbos, we have a slightly more uplifting one, but a similar sort of idea, where we're asking Hashem to rebuild that which was destroyed. And that's the intro before benching. So we've just finished eating, which is self-serving, and we remind ourselves that we're on a mission to bring the world back to a stage where Hashem is comfortable at home here. Okay, that's the intro to benching. There's a custom, minhag, which is not mandatory. It's wash my mechorim. I believe there are certain people who have the custom not to do this. The Hasidic custom is to, yes, wash our hands, and that's just a little tiny drop on the fingertips before we bench. And the idea is to prepare ourselves, and it washes away any sort of residue of food, so our hands are clean, but also if there's anything which is harmful residue that's left over, it washes that away. Zimun, or mezumen, or benching together are names that we have for when we have more than one person. If there's 3 people, or better still, if there's 10 people, when we call each other, we make a declaration and we invite everyone. Let's do this as a communal prayer rather than a personal prayer. So though each one of us ate ourselves, even if we're sat at the same table, I ate my food and you ate your food, but if there are 3 men that are together, then they'll nominate a leader. He will call out. He says, you know what? Here, let's go. Let's do this together.
Together.
Together. There we go. And if there's 10 people, then you get like in a minyan, you can actually say Hashem's name in the call out. Baruch Elokeinu she'achanu mishaloi, rather than Baruch she'achanu mishaloi. And that's how we all do this together. Back in the day, it was that the leader had in mind everyone else and no one else benched. But today that doesn't work. And therefore we all bench ourselves. We're now going to go through 4 parts of what we're calling benching, grace after meals, Birkat Hamazon. And the reason why I say 4 parts, even though you'll find many more paragraphs in the benching, is because there are 4 brachas, 4 sub-blessings that make up the grace. And each one of them has its own source and its own importance. And what we're going to say is it's not all or nothing. If I can only do a little bit, it is quite long. I start off with 1. If I could do more, I'll add a second one. If I can only read 1 in Hebrew and the rest I do in English, I'll do the first one in Hebrew and then build the rest up as I'm going along. So it's good to know which is which. All 3 of the 4, the first 3 of the 4 brachas are biblical. They are instruction on Torah level. In the Torah, it tells us that we should do so. It's actually quoted in the benching. The verse tells us, when you eat and you're satisfied, you should bless Hashem. So after I've finished the meal and I've had bread, I should say this benching. Now the truth is, even if I had less than a full meal, as long as I had a kezayis, I had equivalent of about 30 grams, so 1 ounce, then I should already say this long benching because I've eaten bread to some level of satisfaction. The first of the 3 brachas was written by Moshe, because Moshe Rabbeinu knew that when the man fell from heaven, we have to bless Hashem. We have to say thanks. He also knew there are 3 points that have to be specified in this thank. One is to mention thank you for food. One is to mention thank you for the land that Hashem has promised us. And the third one is for the place where Hashem will call home. We thank Hashem for that, the city of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. Moshe Rabbeinu he coined the wording of the blessing that we make today. And that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. How powerful, how special. The wording that we're saying, of course, it's powerful that it's a biblical mitzvah, but the wording was actually written by Moshe himself. The second blessing, which is Noidelacha, which talks about the land of Israel, was written by Yeshua, the successor of Moshe. Joshua wrote this as he came into Eretz Yisrael, and he wrote this because he coined the blessing. My internet connection is unstable. There it is. Ala Oretz Vala Mazon, to thank Hashem for the land of Israel. Ala Oretz. I want to point out that there are 2 paragraphs in this bracha. One starts with Noideh and it finishes with B'chol Sha'ah, and then it starts Va'al HaKoil and ends Ala Oretz Val HaMazon. Those 2 paragraphs make up the second bracha. And the reason why it's split into 2 paragraphs is because there's sometimes an insert that goes in between them. That's on Purim and on Hanukkah. There's an insert there. Really, it's one bracha. Most Siddurim and benches, it's broken into 2 paragraphs just because there's an insert that sometimes, an add-on that goes there sometimes. And that's why it looks like it's 2 separate brachas. Same thing with the next bracha, which is Rachim and Uvanei, finishes off Boine Barachim of Yerushalayim Amen. One bracha, it's the 3rd bracha written by King David and his son Solomon, and then a prayer to preserve Yerushalayim that they had. Once they established where the Beis Hamikdash, the home for Hashem, would be, then they could coin a bracha for that. And King Solomon was the one who built the temple, built the Beis Hamikdash. Interestingly, the wording of the bracha changed slightly after the destruction, and now the bracha includes wording that says rebuild Jerusalem. It's more or less the same bracha, but asking Hashem to have mercy and rebuild Jerusalem. Fun fact to throw in there, the last word of this bracha is the word Amen. Generally, we don't say Amen to our own blessings. This is an exceptional case. The reason why it's there is because this is the end of benching in a sense. First 3 brachas, biblical level, ends here. but we haven't finished yet. We have a fourth bracha. In order to differentiate between the biblical brachas and the add-on brachas that are said every day, we say the word amen. We say amen as in up until here is one section, bracha 1 from Moshe, that thanks Hashem for food, Hazon, bracha number 2 from Yeshua, that thanks Hashem for the land, ala oretz, and bracha number 3, Boinei Baracham Yerushalayim, is the end of the biblical level, and then we go on to the fourth one, which is after the destruction, there was an add-on bracha made. And this add-on bracha was to thank Hashem for some kindnesses that shook the community and helped them find comfort in a time of distress, and then also has a very special request for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash and the rest. Very briefly, we're running against the clock as always. There is a shorter bracha for the 5 grains that we've had. So if I had a cookie, a cake, if I had a cracker, if I had something that was wheat-based, grain-based, but it wasn't bread, if I drank wine, or if I had any of the 5 national fruits. 5 national fruits, the Shivat Aminim, which are 2 of them are grain, but in addition to that, if I had pomegranate, grapes, olives, that's supposed to say, dates, or figs, any of those deserve an extra special bracha, and that's the one on the screen, often known as Me'en Shalosh, or Ala Michya. You can see that there. But anything else, if I had any other food, any other drink, the bracha is just basically a short 3-liner. We're in Pashas Rabbis, and there's a beautiful nursery rhyme song that goes to this, which we're not going to do right now. And next week, we're going to be learning our prayer. If I can have your attention for another 30 seconds, or it's going to be a minute probably, but we're going to run through what we did today. We did the rules of food are important because they give us discipline, connection to Hashem, and it makes God's home real. We spoke about the timing for our food, usually not before prayer, unless it's for the sake of prayer, and feeding our animals first. That was number 2. Then we went on to saying washing for bread. We have to have any amount of bread needs washing, but we have to prepare the bread first, use a washing cup, clear our hands, wrist to fingertips, and 3, then 3, unlike the washing of the morning. Lift our hands, say the bracha, rub them and dry them, hold the bread and make a bracha. No talking until after the first bite is swallowed. Okay, we said it's similar to the Kohanim who would wash their hands. And even though we're not Kohanim, even though the Kohanim are not eating yet, but it's a safety protection to help others and to await from Mashiach. We said the importance about mealtime is wartime. We're fighting with selfish urges, trying to remain mindful, and therefore it's called loichem lechem. We spoke about kosher, how we kosher things, the need for supervision, how we keep our kitchen kosher, how we use the keli mikveh, how do we wait in time between eating milk and amiti, and we also spoke about the idea of elevating the food we eat. We went on to the brachas, and we spoke about the different groups and categories. We spoke about how we make our food more holy, having guests, sharing Torah thoughts, making the right brachas, washing hands, and we spoke about salt. And then we just finished now talking about the grace after meals, the longer one for after bread, the shorter one for after the special foods, and the most common one, the short-handed one, which is that. I do want to say that next week, this time, there might not be a class, just because, please God, next week, Wednesday night, Thursday, is the anniversary of the passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and we are running a Giving Day campaign, charity campaign for Chabad across the country, across the nation, and therefore I'm not sure if there'll be a class. I'm going to ask you that if there is a class, we'll push it off. Please keep your eyes open on the emails and the WhatsApp that will let us know if there will be or won't be a class, depending on how the program plays itself out. Thank you very much for joining. We've done very well. We covered an enormous amount of ground. I hope we've learned something. I hope we've learned something you can put into practice. And I wish you a mindful, delicious meal here, now, and always. Sei gesund, and thank you for joining. Any
Thank you.
questions? I'm happy to try and answer.
Sei gesund.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Any
לילה
questions?
טוב.